Open your Bibles to the book of Job. Today we're starting a new series through the book of Job in this month of November, and we're titling it, There's Always Hope. The more I read the book of Job, the more I realize it's not so much a true story of pain and suffering. It's a story of hope, and sometimes we miss that. And so I want to pull that out as we go through the book of Job this month. I say that because all the time we want to give up. Often we give up sooner than we should. When I say that, I think of a guy that was at the Grove before he moved back to New Jersey. His name was Craig. And I heard that Craig had been in a car accident. And so I went out to see Craig, and he's in traction at home. He's at home, but he's a mess. He's in a bed, and it seemed like everything on his body was in a cast. I said, Craig, what happened? He said, well, I almost died. He was going down Greenfield Road, if you know your streets around here, heading south. And he was new to Arizona. He didn't know that it dead-ended at Chandler Heights. And it was like 11 o'clock at night, he said. He's doing 60 miles an hour and went right off the end of the road and into a canal. You know where this is? A dry riverbed. His Chevy Avalanche rolled several times. When the first responders got there, they called in, they said, we need the coroner. You know, there's going to be a fatality to investigate. They thought he was dead. But he lived. He had a broken back when I saw him, broken neck, broken femur. He had about 5 ribs broken. But as I'm talking to him, he kept saying, oh, Palmer, I'm going to be fine. This is nothing. You know, he's from New Jersey. He's a Yankee fan. All he wanted to do is talk about the Yankees. Those guys think they can win everything, you know. In New York City, those Mets are down 3-1, right? They still believe they're going to win. That's what they believe. And a couple of weeks later, Craig walks into our church here, into the Grove, and he's healing, and he healed. And my point is, there's always hope. Sometimes we give up too soon. And so as we read the book of Job today, I hope that you see that. I want to start with just this one sentence in verse 1. We read, in the land of Uz, there was a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and he shunned evil. So it sounds like Job is the man who's doing everything right, but he suffers. And so it begs the question, it's the timeless problem of pain. Why do the very worst things happen to the very best people? Veronica and I, before moving to Chandler, lived with our 4 sons in Malawi, East Africa. And as we lived there, I started to be bothered at the core by the things I was seeing. I had a friend, his name was Moses, who worked on the college campus with us. His twin daughters both died of malaria. We had another friend who the doctor called us and said, Veronica Palmer, you need to meet with her and tell her she's tested positive for AIDS. I've never done that before. We had a young girl die in a fire on our campus. I mean, one thing after another. And so finally, I decided to teach a class that I called a theology of suffering. And I thought, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And so with a class of Malawian students, we started to look at what the Bible says about pain and tragedy and trouble and affliction. And I had them read C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain. I had them read Brennan Manning's The Ragamuffin Gospel. We read Henry Nouwen's The Wounded Healer. We read Shusaku Endu's Silence, which is just this riveting novel about a priest who goes to Japan and is tortured. And as I'm seeing all of this, my thinking changes. I see that maybe I shouldn't have titled the class A Theology of Suffering. Maybe I should have titled it A Theology of Hope. And I taught the class mainly, I thought, to have application in places like Africa or places like Haiti where there's a lot of trouble. But then we moved back to Chandler, Arizona, and I saw this. That trouble is the world's common language. Because even in Chandler, I saw men and women were losing their jobs. I saw teenagers rebel. I saw children get sick. I saw people file for bankruptcy and have houses foreclosed on. And I saw marriages crumble. And I realized that suffering is the world's common language. We all go through it. The question is not if we will suffer. The question is when. If you haven't hurt yet, it's going to come. That's the bad news. But the good news is there's always hope. Growing up, I grew up in the church. My father was a pastor and a missionary, and I've heard a lot of sermons. I heard a lot of sermons growing up. I can't remember much anyone talking about suffering or pain. When anyone ever had trouble, you know what I usually heard? Well, they just don't have enough faith. That's what I was told. If they had more faith, those bad things wouldn't happen to them. We don't see that correlation in the book of Job, do we? We read Job was a righteous man. He was full of faith. And then the very worst things start to happen to him. But many theologians, many pastors, many Christian writers don't write about this because suffering and affliction don't fit so well with polished shopping malls and manicured subdivisions and iPhone 6 Pluses. Where do you fit a theology of suffering with that? And so we don't talk about it. I remember being in 7th grade, and we were in the deep South, and I was in a private Christian school, and one of my buddies in my class, it's a small class, his name's Andy. His brother, one day Andy doesn't show up for school because his brother had taken a gun and taken his life. And so Andy didn't show up for a couple of weeks, and then the morning he was coming back, our teacher came in class and she says, okay, Andy's brother has died. We all knew this. She said, he's coming back today. She said, but I don't want anyone here to say a word to Andy about his brother. Like it's a taboo subject. We don't talk about that. And so Andy came in and we all want to say, hey, Andy, glad. We don't say anything. And then the teacher gets up, and it's a Christian school, so we always open in prayer, and she says, Palmer, will you open us in prayer? And I was like, I couldn't think of anything else to pray about. Plus, I want to pray for Andy. And so I prayed for Andy, and I prayed for his family and their pain and their suffering. And my teacher gave me the worst stink eye ever when I said amen. And she never asked me to pray again the rest of the year because I prayed for people who are suffering. But that's kind of how we treat it, don't we? We think God doesn't have a plan. One of the great things we see in Job is that life may unravel, but God is in control of every last bit of it. Nothing in the book of Job happens outside of God's control. That's a huge piece of what I hope you see today. So life is unraveling, and so it begs the question. I'll put this on the screen. It's the timeless question of, if God is all good, and if God is all powerful, so think about that, why do the very worst things happen to the very best people? So let's look at Job's story here. And I'm going to start in verse 14. If you don't know the story, the true story of Job, go home and start reading it from start to finish. And it begins, like I read, there's a righteous man named Job, and then Satan meets with God, and he says, just God, let me test him a little bit. He won't be so righteous anymore. That's how the conversation goes. And God says, okay, try, because he's not going to cave. Verse 14. And so Satan goes back to hurt and to injure Job. A messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabians attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. So Job's fortune is about to be lost, and things are falling apart. As we start here this morning, as we start to read of Job's story of pain that just won't end, it goes on and on. For 42 chapters, we read about it. I hope you see that the story of Job is your story. I said a moment ago that suffering maybe is the world's common language. We can try to avoid it, but it happens. And so Job's story maybe is your story. Job's story is for every person who's lost a job, everyone who's been sick, everyone who's been moved out of state, everyone who's had a teenager rebel or had a marriage crumble. It's for everyone who's lost their job. It's for everyone who's ended a marriage. It's for everyone who's filed for bankruptcy or had their house foreclosed. It's for everyone whose dream career has ended, or you think it's ended. And so the story of Job is for you. I have this first thought that I want to start with this morning, and it's this, that there will be trouble. As we look at Job, we see that it's coming. I hope that you see that as we talk about these ideas in Job, that God has not abandoned us, God is not absent, God is not silent. I think sometimes we say really glib things as Christians, like God will never give you more than you will handle. Well, those words aren't even in the Bible. That's the thing. I remember going to Haiti soon after the earthquake in Haiti, and our medical team was taking care of 11 children with crush fractures. Most of them had amputations. And Paul Gunther and I are down there, and I walk into the different rooms where the kids are in this small Dominican Republic clinic, and I see a small boy named Lucinio, and through a translator in Creole, I'm asking, so what happened? And Lucinio says, well, I was playing soccer outside, and the ground started to move, and so we ran up against this wall thinking it would protect us. Instead, the wall fell on us, and his arm is trapped under the wall, and it crushes it, and it ruins it. And the doctors can't put it back together, and so they amputate his arm. My point is, if you're 11 years old and your arm is amputated, all of a sudden that's a lot more than you can handle. I think sometimes as Christians, we make pain worse and suffering worse, and we say things like, well, God is doing this to you because there's sin in your life. We don't see that correlation in the Bible. Job's friends try to accuse him of this, but we just don't see it there. And even after, for example, the earthquake in Haiti, we had preachers on TV get up and say, well, God is judging Haiti because of the sin in Haiti. And I thought, wow, if Port-au-Prince fell because God is judging Haiti because of the sin in Haiti, then why in the world is Las Vegas still standing? It's true. Why am I still standing? Why are any of us still standing? It just is not what God does, but sometimes Christians say those things. William Young, who's the author of The Shack, he writes this, when I became honest about my trouble, my reputation went out the window, but I became the freest man in the world. The book of Job is very controversial for the Hebrew people. They don't get it because the Jewish people draw a direct, straight line between sin and suffering. If your daughter is born blind, it's because her mother or her father sinned. If you get sick with leprosy, it's because you sinned. And they draw this line, but then we read the last sentence in chapter 1, verse 22. We read this, in all of this, Job does not sin. And in the entire book, we never read that Job is suffering in any way because of his sin, but sometimes we tell people that. Here's what we don't like as Westerners, or I'll be more blunt and say as Americans. We don't like a mystery or a paradox. But to understand God, it's really the way God uses pain and affliction. There is a mystery there, and there is a paradox, because the very best people are not immune from suffering, and they suffer. You see, I think I've heard often in my life, I've heard a gospel of success, but I haven't heard much about a gospel of suffering. We hear much about a gospel of prosperity, but we don't say much about a gospel of pain. And my point in this is that we cannot always reason out. We don't have easy pat answers to why do people suffer. But in Job 2, we read this. These are Job's words back to his wife. I'm going to tell you later what she says, but he says this in verse 10. Should we only accept good from God and not accept trouble? And so I invite you as we start today to sit in the ashes with Job. Because maybe Job's story is your story, and maybe you're going through trouble right now, and God is trying to teach you something. He's trying to do something new in your life. But never forget, there's always hope. All right, so I said we're going to start with this thought. There will be trouble. Let's pick up in verse 16, where we were reading. And we read, while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the sky and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them and put your servants to the sword, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you. And so I'll say this, trouble travels fast, doesn't it? Trouble is inevitable in this life. I think we go through life as Western American people believing we can buy insurance to keep us from suffering. That we can wear enough helmets and have enough airbags that we won't suffer. I think children raised today really believe they live in a world where they should not be harmed. That's kind of the world that we live in. We even put warning labels on the most absurd products, like on coffee cups, that say, this thing is hot, it can burn you. I brought a few more warning labels with you. Here's one here. This is on a hair blower, and we read this: do not use while sleeping. I don't even know how you do that. Maybe your wife's sleeping, you're blowing her hair. Is that what's happening? I mean, it's crazy. I brought a few more. Okay, do not iron while wearing this shirt. All right, that's awesome. And I've seen that often be a problem. Ooh, caution, choking hazard, a hanger. If you look at that picture, there's a hanger sideways in the person's throat. I'm serious. What else do we have here? We have remove child before washing. Okay, that's important. I don't even know what that is. Some kind of backpack. Remove child. I think we have one more. Yes, when you're checking the diaper, you check like this. Hey, we're just trying to help. One of the things we do at the Grove, we just try to help. That's what that is. None of this makes you immune. Even what we found out this week, bacon is a killer. Bacon will kill you, like a cigarette. Boo is right. What's going on? But as I said a minute ago, pain, tragedy, affliction, it's the world's common language. It happens to all of us. Job writes, or we read this in Job 3:19, the small and the great are equals in this place. Tragedy does not know what your income is. Tragedy does not know how important or famous you are. The worst things happen to the best people. There will be trouble. M. Scott Peck says this in The Road to Life. In fact, it's his first sentence, The Road Less Traveled. He writes the first sentence, life is difficult. Job in chapter 7, verse 1 says, human life is a struggle. I've often compared the trouble of life to a boulevard that you drive down, and there's one thing after another that goes wrong. That's Job's story. Sometimes that's our story. I was down in Biloxi, Mississippi. I went down there a month after the Hurricane Katrina hit Biloxi, Gulfport, New Orleans. And I went down there with a friend to see if we could find a church that the Grove could partner with. And so I knew a guy that had pastored at the First Presbyterian Church in Biloxi. And so we got off the interstate, came through the town of Biloxi, and things didn't look that bad. And I thought, oh, this is a smaller hurricane than people said, that the newscasters had made it out to be. Because we get to the church, and this big brick church is still standing. I mean, the roof is still on, the steeple's still on. And I thought, well, how bad can this be? And then we came around the church. The church sits facing the Gulf of Mexico. And as we pulled around the church, first my eyes went to the bright green water. It was a sunny day. The skies were blue. The beaches are white. And then I looked right. And all I could see, as far as I could see, was devastation. It looked like a garbage dump for miles and miles. Every house that was on the beach was down, gone, foundation. Then so I looked the other way. Everything, as far as I could see, was gone. And then we pulled out on Beach Boulevard, that's the one that runs along the Gulf there, and started to drive down the coast. And every home, some people were sitting literally on the front steps of where their home used to be, and whole families were together just crying because the house is gone. You can't ever put it back. Their whole life is gone. There was a car on top of a roof. There were slabs of cement from the boulevard through houses. And then we drove maybe 2 or 3 miles, started to pull inland, and someone had taken a broken piece of plywood and leaned it against a tree and taken red paint, and they sprayed Boulevard of Broken Dreams. And that's what life in Biloxi had become. That's what Job's life is. Maybe that's been your life. Sometimes the pain of life hits one day after another, 1 week after another, and you think there's no end. We're going to get to the part where I say there's always hope, but there will be trouble. We have this on the screen. Trouble has a way of traveling fast, and that was the case with Job. We read that one affliction hits after another, and then Satan goes back to Job because Job is still trusting God. And Satan says, God, if you let me make him sick, let me mess up his body, and he'll give in quickly. And so here's what we read, chapter 2, verse 7. Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores, from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. So sometimes pain is physical. Sometimes my sons have asked me, what's the worst pain you've ever felt? I know exactly when that was. I was 21 years old, and one of my kidneys got clogged and blocked and was swelling, and I was in the ER, and the doctor took an x-ray or whatever he took, and he said, we need to put a catheter in there. And so he sent me downstairs to the lower level of the hospital. They called it the basement. I'll call it the torture chamber. And they sent me down there. And they sent a young guy in. And he says, I'm here to put a catheter in you. And I said, ooh, how long have you been doing this? Because he looked rather young. He says, well, I'm an intern. And that was soon clearly obvious. Because he took a needle. He showed me the needle. It's like 8 inches long, okay? And he says, I have to put this in, and then I slip a larger needle over that one, and then a larger, 3 times, he says, I have to get this needle in there, and then I can slip the catheter tube over that. I was like, okay, this is going to be exciting. I said, can you knock me out for this? He says, no, we need you awake for the interrogation. Something, I don't know why he wanted me awake. He said he couldn't knock me out. So he starts stabbing the thing in my side, and he can't get it in. And so he's leaning, putting his shoulder into it like I'm a piece of beef. And then he goes, oh, no. He collapses. He goes, the needle just bent. I said, great. So he backs, takes it out, and starts another one. And literally, he bends a second 6-inch needle on my side. Now, I'm screaming. Don't get me wrong. I'm screaming like shamelessly, like a 5th grade girl right there, just screaming. And I said, do you have to keep doing that? He says, hang on, let me try something else. He climbs up on the gurney and gets over me on his knees, straddling me. I'm sure that's how they teach it in med school, right? And puts his whole weight on me. He does this 3 times before he gets it in. I'm about to pass out. So that's that. But that pain pales in comparison to some of the other pain we feel. Mine is maybe just a sliver compared to what some of you have suffered even physically. Sometimes pain is physical. So Job, we start with that here. And then we read of relational pain in Job. Do you know, think about this with me, and I think it's true, that maybe some of our deepest pain and hurt is caused by a person that we love the most or we trusted the most. C.S. Lewis, in The Problem of Pain, he writes this. He says, the possibility of pain is inherent in the very existence of a world where people can meet. When people become wicked, they will certainly use this possibility to hurt one another. As we keep reading through Job in chapter 22, for example, his friends come around him, and then his friends start to accuse him of things. Chapter 22, verse 7, one says, you have given no water to the weary to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry. And Job comes back and says, that's a lie. You're just lying about me. So his friends who are there to comfort him are hurting him. Maybe in your life you've seen the person you've loved the most hurts you the deepest. I've seen it often. When I say that, I think of a guy I'll say his name is Mike. He's in another city, in another state. I've known him for a long time. And Veronica and I are back in this city, and we're just in Chili's waiting for a table. And he walks in. I go, hey, it's great to see you. I say, how are you? Now, when we say, how are you, people are just supposed to say, fine, right? That's all. Instead, he says, I'm doing terrible. Well, nobody wants to hear that, but now that he said it, I said, well, why do you say that? He said, haven't you heard? I said, no, I haven't heard. He said, well, my wife left me. She's living with another man, and tomorrow morning I have to go to court because she's trying to keep me from ever seeing our 3 kids again. His wife is now hurting him more than anyone else could in the whole world. The people we love the most sometimes hurt us the deepest. Pain also I have, sometimes the pain that we feel is financial. We read of Job's bank account, or we could say his sheep account is running on empty now. His ATM of cattle, it's on 0. He's lost everything. He's bankrupt. It's all gone. Sometimes pain, I'll describe it as this. Sometimes pain is social. And maybe you haven't dealt with it, maybe you have, but I think some of life's deepest pain is when we are biased against, or when we are shamed, when we are prejudiced against, when people treat us differently because of our background or because of our ethnicity. That becomes some of the deepest pain. And then I have the pain of loss is another way I describe it. And Job suffers that. If we keep reading in chapter 1, verse 18, we read about Job's children. Another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting, drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the four corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. At this, Job got up, and he tore his robe, and he shaved his head, and he fell on the ground to worship. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, he describes pain in two ways. He says there is minor suffering, and then he says this, there is great suffering. When an intern shoves a needle in your side and hurts your body, I think that's minor suffering. When your sons and your daughters all die, that's great suffering. And Job is going through this great suffering, and maybe this boulevard of broken dreams has been your story. And so that brings me to what I want to say most this morning. I want to say this, don't give up. There's always hope. If you know God much at all, then if you know him, you know there's always hope. And as you read the story of Job, we see this over and over. Turn over one page in your Bible to chapter 2, verse 9. And his wife is frustrated by everything that's happened. Mrs. Job is not happy. And Mrs. Job says, Job, curse God and die. Just give up. Do you know what I love about Job? He says, no, I'm not going to. He says, how can we take the happiness and the pleasure and the best things from God and not also take the pain and the affliction? And so Job refuses to give up. That's my favorite thing about Job. Even when his wife is saying, curse God and die. I think in life, in general, most of us tend to give up too easily. I had a guy walk in my office a couple of years ago. He's a lot older than me. He was in his, let's say, mid to late 70s. And he sits down and he looks rather disturbed. And I says, well, what can I do for you? He says, well, Palmer, I'm here to ask you to plan my funeral. I said, no kidding. You want me to plan I didn't even know you're sick. Tell me what happened. I'm terribly sorry. He says, oh, no, I'm absolutely fine. I'm not sick at all. He says, but one day I'm going to die, and I'd like you to do my funeral. I'd like to plan it right now. And I said, no, get up. You can leave now. I'm not planning your funeral. You need a Red Bull, but we're done with this conversation. Because he'd given up. How are you going to give up when you're perfectly fine in life? You can't. When I was in high school, I made a promise to myself because of something that happened to a friend of mine. Her name was Birdie. Birdie, I'm a twin, and Birdie's a twin. By the way, someone remind me to call my twin brother. That just hit me because if today's my birthday, it's his birthday too. After we're done, So I got really sidetracked there. So I had this friend named Birdie, and I had known her growing up all the way till we graduated from high school. But she went to a different school than I did, and her class went to the beach like their last senior class trip. And Birdie didn't swim much growing up, and a wave came in and lifted her feet off. She had waded in just to her waist, thinking she would just go out in the surf, and the wave picked her up, and then the rip current was vicious there, and it pulled her out. And way out, and right away, a man dove in, swam after her as fast as he could, and he got to her, as I'm told. But the current, the rip current was vicious. Now it's taking them several hundred yards out. And she was like dead weight. She was a horrible swimmer, couldn't swim well at all. And he's trying to pull her back, and he says that she got heavy, and he thought he was in trouble. And so this man let go and swam back without her, and she died. And for a month, I laid in bed every night going, God, why'd you let Birdie die? And more than that, I just was so mad at this man that let go. How could you hold on to her? No, if you get her back, she lives, and you let go, you give up. And I would pray at night that month. I would pray at night. I'd say, God, I promise if someone needs me, I'm not going to give up on them. I'm not going to give up. And I try not to give up on people if I think I can help at all. I think we give up too easily. Some of you want to or already have given up on a son or a daughter. Don't give up. Some of you want to, or maybe you have given up on a marriage. Don't give up. Some of you want to give up on a friendship because they've hurt you with their words. Can I say, don't give up? Some of you want to give up on God because he hasn't answered a prayer, because life is hurting like Job's. Can I say, don't give up? I wrote God Can't Sleep after I moved back to Chandler from Malawi. And I write in it about how Jesus never gave up on anyone. Let me read a paragraph to you. Jesus never gave up on anyone. He didn't give up on Lazarus. He wouldn't give up on the adulterous woman. He refused to let go of Peter when the waves were pulling him under, not even to teach him a lesson. And he'll never give up on you and me. I've learned in life that people usually find it easier to quit than to hold on and persevere. I don't think Christians should quit anything easily. Don't quit Pilates. Don't quit your guitar lessons. Don't quit rehab. Don't quit on your friendships. Don't quit going to church. Don't let your kids quit football even when the practice gets too tough and the coaches yell at them. Let the world quit. Be known for your tenacity because you belong to the Father in heaven of great hope. Your God in heaven. With God, there's always hope. And so don't give up on your friends. Don't give up on your kids. Don't give up on your marriage. Hold on. Dallas Willard says this, one of the great thinkers on spiritual formation. One of the remarkable changes brought on by Jesus and his people brought into the ancient world concerned the revelation of hope and to a primary virtue. Hope was not well regarded by the Greco-Roman world. The Greeks believed that hope was a setup for disappointment. You're better off keeping your expectations low. So don't get your hopes up. And Jesus comes along and says, no, I'm the light of the world. There's hope for this life now, and there's hope for eternity. You see, hope is as necessary as the air we breathe. And I keep saying this. The Bible keeps reminding us over and over that we are people of hope. Because of our Father in heaven, we are people of hope. Hope is the fuel of the human soul. Without hope, students drop out of college. Without hope, wives give up on their husbands, and husbands give up on their wives. Without hope, people quit their jobs. Without hope, people give up on God. And so I stand here this morning to remind us all, like Job, that there's always hope.